This is Relationscapes, the podcast where we map the territory of human identity and connection. I'm journalist Blair Hodges in Salt Lake City, and our guide in this episode about immigration is Pulitzer Prize-winning historian Ada Ferrer.
You know, life is complicated. People are complicated. History is complicated. And here is the story of one family. And, you know, I say it's a family broken by history, and it is, but it's also a family made by history. You can't understand our family unless you put us in history. And I think you can't really understand history unless you make room for families like ours and people like us, just ordinary people. They're not the ones making history, but they're the ones living it.
Ada Ferrer was 11 months old when her mother fled Cuba in 1963. That was 4 years after Fidel Castro came to power. Ada was too young to remember that moment that would shape her family's future, but her mother passed details of the story to Ada, like an inheritance. Not every detail, though, and Ada's father had secrets of his own, too. Ada found many of the missing pieces in a trove of letters her parents left behind after they died, pieces that she fits together with broader Cuban history in her new book, Keeper of My Kin, Memoir of an Immigrant Daughter, and she joins us to talk about it right now. Ada Ferrer, welcome to Relationscapes.
Oh, it's great to be here, Blair.
Your book opens up with a story that your mom used to tell a lot, how she fled Cuba in 1963. Together with you, you were 10 months old, and both of you were going to meet your father in the United States. Take us to that scene in New York City from the opening chapter of your book. I'll have you read on page 5 here, where we join you and your mom as you're landing in America.
Okay.
Or landing in the United States.
Yes. Good catch. All right. Is it making too much noise when I do that? Should I take it off the jacket? Does it matter? I'll take it off the jacket.
You can take it off,
yeah. Yeah.
A little bit of page wrestling is kind of cool, but yeah.
Okay, but maybe not too much. Okay, the bottom of page 5. Here I go. We finally landed in New York City on July 4th. My father picked us up at the airport. When I saw him, I opened my arms to him as if I already knew him, even though I had never met him before. When my mother told that part of the story, she always repeated the scene of my first meeting with my father, as if to make sure that the listener understood how momentous that was, how proud she was of me. I can picture the scene of our arrival. My mother, unable to contain her joy, her arm around my father's shoulders as he held me aloft, seeking recognition in my eyes. Both of them oblivious to the passengers streaming around either side of us, like water parting around an island. Had there been a large plate glass window there, had the light been just right, the three of us together might have cast a single shadow, shaped something like a heart. There we were, an immovable trio, my mother's little family. In the most consequential event of her life, I was my mother's companion. And if I close my eyes, I can see her eyes on mine, feel her fingers curled around my arm, squeezing, hear the lilting sound of her voice as she tells our story again and again.
And she would tell that story again and again to you.
Right.
And you have no immediate memory of it, being 10 months old.
Right.
But you've since become an expert and a historian of Cuba, the place where you and your mother left. So looking back, what was happening in Cuba that had your dad leave and that resulted in your mom bringing you this way? What was going on in Cuba?
Right. Well, there was a revolution that brought Fidel Castro to power on January 1st, 1959. And initially, it was received with overwhelming support by the Cuban people. My mother was very supportive in the beginning. My father was more skeptical. Mm-hmm. By the time we left in 1963, the revolution had changed, and Fidel Castro declared it a socialist revolution in 1961 in the context of the U.S. Bay of Pigs invasion. And in 1962, there was the missile crisis. So by 63, several things are clear. First, there's a very hostile relationship with the U.S. Diplomatic relations have been broken. There are no longer embassies. There are no commercial flights. And then the other thing is that that Fidel Castro has declared the revolution socialist.
What was significant about that, though?
Well, it was the middle of the Cold War, and Cuba had traditionally been a close ally of the United States, a kind of client state of the United States. So here we were, the U.S. at loggerheads with the Soviet Union, and we had an island 90 miles from the coast of Florida that was communist and allied with the Soviet Union and willing to have nuclear missiles facing in the direction of the United States. So it was hugely significant. Nothing like that had ever happened in Latin America, which the U.S. always considered its backyard.
And your dad was kind of skeptical about it. I assume he wanted political change, though, perhaps, but maybe wasn't on board with the way it was going, or what was his position?
Well, he was a country boy from the center of the island, sixth grade education. He did something that many men of his generation did, which was to join the army as a means of social mobility.
Okay.
So he joined the army. He became a stenographer in the army. So he was not particularly political or ideological, but he was very, very anti-communist, which was not so uncommon in Cuba at the time. And actually, a lot of the people who supported Fidel Castro in the beginning were also anti-communist. So his suspicion was from the start that Fidel Castro was a communist, and he didn't support him. So very different than my mom, who was happy when he came to power and celebrated and cheered and remained supportive initially.
Why did he end up leaving? And he left first. So what ended up happening? Yeah.
So he was a member of the army. One of the first things that Fidel Castro did on taking power was dissolve the army. So my father lost his job, ended up selling sandals in a park in Havana, just trying to make ends meet. In 1961, in the lead up to the Bay of Pigs, Fidel Castro called on ordinary Cubans to denounce neighbors, to denounce anyone they thought might support a U.S. invasion. And so a neighbor denounced my father as a potential supporter of the U.S., as a counter-revolutionary, et cetera, et cetera. So he was picked up as a, yes. Actually, it didn't even have to be anything as formal or even as committed as a dissident. The idea is that you were suspicious. People were arrested preemptively on the basis of what they might do. So a neighbor denounced him as someone who might support an invasion.
And that could result in arrest, or what would he face?
And in that moment, in that time, in the lead up to the Bay of Pigs, it did result in arrest. So about 50,000 people were arrested around, in the days leading up to the invasion, which was actually, today's the anniversary, right? April 17th, yeah.
Wow.
Which was April 17th, 1961. So I can't do the math. Was that 65 years ago today?
Yeah. I'm a humanities person, so.
That's right, me too. Anyway, so he was arrested. He always said that the guy who denounced him was just a cranky neighbor, and my father owed him money and he wanted to get back at him. I don't really know. But I do think that my father would have supported an invasion had it made it to Havana. But anyway, he was arrested. He was detained for about a week in a movie theater because there were not enough prisons to hold the people who were denounced those days. So they turned a movie theater. At the time, it was called the Blanquita, and it was the largest movie theater in Cuba. I think maybe even the largest movie theater in the world. It later came to be called the Karl Marx Theater. And he was detained there for about a week and then finally let go. But it was in that moment that he made the decision to leave. I think he'd already been thinking about it, but that scared him. He thought that maybe it could happen again.
Yeah.
He'd been in the army. He knew of people. He actually, in the army, he used to work for the Military Intelligence Service as a stenographer. And the Military Intelligence Service used to, keep tabs on anti-government activities against Batista, right? So when the revolution wasn't in power.
Right.
And
right. He's probably on a list someplace.
So he's probably on a list. And so what he did is he used to type up the reports on interrogations, on subversive activities, and so on. And I actually found in an archive a report that he had typed. But so he knew people, or he knew of people, he had worked for people who had been arrested and who had been executed. So he
Yeah.
was always scared of what might happen to him, and he left.
And he wasn't the only one.
he wasn't
This was
the only
a
one.
lot of people leaving.
A lot of people leaving.
He wanted to do it quick. He took advantage of an opportunity, a strange sort of opportunity that you describe in the book for people that want to check that out. But your mother then wants to join him,
Right.
and she's going to bring you along. So as you just read, your mother reunites with your father in New York, not knowing how long the family would be
Right.
gone. As far as she knew, you might, however the revolution went, you might be back in a number of weeks or months or a couple of years. And for all the times that your mother would tell you the story of fleeing Cuba, you say that she actually left out the most important thing about it.
Right.
And that's the fact that she took you with her, but left behind a son, your older brother.
That's right.
Tell us about that.
So I have an older brother. He's her son from her first marriage. His name was Poli, which is short for Hipólito. Everyone called him Poli or Polito. And when we left in 1963, he was 9. And the reason he didn't leave with us was that in order to take him out of the country, the father needed to grant his permission for that to happen. And his father refused. His father was a member of the new revolutionary police. He didn't think it would reflect well on him to have his son leave the country. He was also, I grew up thinking of him as not a good person. And I think he was also kind of vindictive and didn't want to give in to my mother. And so he didn't let his son leave. And
he also didn't seem very involved in
he did not seem
Poli's
very
life
involved.
at all.
No. So it was a vindictive, selfish, and cruel move on his part. He didn't raise him. He didn't go see him much. He didn't provide financial support. So he was a fairly absent figure for Poli, but present in the huge effect he had on his life by not letting him leave.
Yeah. And not only did your mom not bring Poli with you, the second thing that you learned later in life is that she didn't tell Poli that she was leaving.
Right. Yeah, and that was so hard for me to accept, to kind of just, to hear. So when she left, she did not tell him we were going. She didn't say goodbye. We left behind his back. And, part of me, even from, just like, how could she do that? But it was it was a different time. And it wasn't something she decided alone. She decided in consultation with her own mother, my grandmother, with her sisters. And their thought was that it would just be too hard to tell him, that he would lose it, he would cry, he would get hysterical, that it would just be too painful for everyone, for my mother, and that maybe she wouldn't be able to leave if she saw that. So they made a decision to not tell him and to break it to him after the fact. And that was supposed to make it easier. But, I think of it and, people make all kinds of decisions they don't want to make.
Yeah, this is like a Sophie's Choice type of situation of
Right.
like, she had a 10-month-old baby
Yeah.
as well. And who knows what the revolution is going to do. And
Yeah.
your father was already there and who knows how long it's going to, you can stack up all the reasons on both
Yeah.
sides. On the other side, being a parent, caring
Right.
about Poli,
Right.
and his welfare
Right.
and knowing that his father probably isn't going to be there for him
Yeah.
and all the trauma that can cause. So there's so many factors
and
here.
And really the other thing that is that she always believed, and my grandmother and my aunts and everyone always believed, that once my mother left, his father would see it was real, that Poli's father would say, okay, I'll let him go, that after she was gone, he would step up and give permission for him to leave.
Well,
And everyone kept trying that. So my grandmother kept appealing to him, my aunts kept appealing to him, Poli kept appealing to him, and everyone assumed that he would. That was the main thing. They assumed he would give in and allow him to leave. Then the other thing they assumed is that the revolution wouldn't last much longer, and that we would come back. We would go back to Cuba.
hindsight bias is 2020.
Right.
Those hopes make sense, but tragically, neither of those things happened. And Your book is filled with records created by your family. One of the most powerful things I think about this book is its immediate access to the past through these documents,
Right.
including a collection of letters that young Polly at age 9 and up was writing to your mother.
Right.
What do you remember about those letters? Because you're looking at it to tell this family history, but it's also so personal for you. What stood out to you in these letters from this young boy?
Well, I mean, one thing that stood out at a very basic level is just that the letters existed. So, I mean, I remember letters when I was growing up, and I remember my mother reading them, and I remember her reading them out loud to us. I remember seeing his handwriting and loving the way he wrote his name. So I have a memory of them. But I had no idea that she had saved them and that they survived. And so I didn't discover the letters until after my mother died, until after my father died.
Yeah, this is in 2022.
In 2022, and I was alone in their apartment and just opened a closet, and there was this clear box on a shelf, and I pulled them down, and she had
Wow.
tied them, she had them all in a stack together and still in the envelopes, and she had tied them with gold curling ribbon to keep them all together. And I remember I opened the first one, and I think she had them in order, or partly in order, because the first letter in the pile that I opened was the first one he had written to her. And it was written less than a week after we left. And I just couldn't believe my eyes when I saw it, because I recognized it was a boy's handwriting. I saw his signature at the end. I looked at the date, and I just couldn't believe it, and I feel like, the letters are a gift to me, right? They let me see my brother growing up. They let me see the relationship. They let me write this book. And so they're like Boli's gift to me. They're my mother's gift to me. They document something horrible that happened, something incredibly painful. And yet to me, they're a gift.
Yeah. You even said that the word that you use to describe reading them is excruciating.
Yeah. Yeah, because, he's a little boy, right? He's 9.5. He has no idea what's just happened to him. So when we left and my mother, and this she revealed to me very late in life. She was in the hospital after a surgery. And at the time I was writing my book, revising my book on Cuba and American history. And I was working on the chapter on migration after the Cuban Revolution. And I remember, I was in the hospital with her, going up to her bed and just sitting with her and saying, "Tell me something about when we left Cuba." And she said, in Spanish, but I'll translate. She said, "We left the house at 6 in the evening. Boli was outside playing with friends." So he had no idea what was happening as he was playing. And so that night we went to an aunt's house who lived in a more central neighborhood in Havana. And then in the morning we left for the airport and left for Mexico City. So even the decision to leave the house the night before was about leaving in a way that Boli wouldn't see. And so I start reading the letters, and they tell him, like, in less than a week they tell him, because the first letter is dated May 4th. And originally they told him that my mother had gone to the countryside to care for an ailing relative, and she had taken me with her. So I don't know, they told him within the week, and then he starts writing these letters, and they're in a little boy's handwriting. Initially he's not expressing his feelings, and they're just excruciating to read. He'll say things like, the one in particular that got me was, actually, let me just check it's very short. I don't want to get it wrong.
It's on 77, I bet.
77. So this is in February 1964. So we've been gone a little over 9 months. And he writes, "When a letter arrives from there, I get so happy that sometimes it makes me sad." And there's lines like that all over the letters. "I miss you. I really want to see Arita. If you only knew how much I miss you all. I want you to send me something because I am sad." Things like that. It's a little boy, and he's sad, and he's trying to make sense of it, and he's asking her to send him, shoes or money for a bicycle. Things like, so they're little boys' letters, but they're just full of this deep, deep trauma and hurt.
And I think, we'll talk about this a little bit later on, but your relationship with Poli becomes complicated. And so that's another angle, I
Right.
think, to why these letters affected you the way that you
Yeah.
did when you read them. We're talking with Ada Ferrer about the book Keeper of My Kin, Memoir of an Immigrant Daughter. All right, Ada, let's talk about your life in the United States. I'm thinking about a quote from chapter 8, where you write, "If my parents discovered America in Brooklyn's East New York, it was in a town called West New York that I discovered Cuba. I couldn't help it. Cuba was everywhere there."
Hmm.
I love this because your parents are experiencing the United States and you're experiencing Cuba here in the United States. Talk about what it was like growing up there.
Yeah. So I grew up mostly in a town called West New York, New Jersey. We moved there when I was just before I started second grade. So I was 7. And I lived there until I went to college. And it's a town very urban. It's about, it's less than a square mile and had about 45,000 people, I think, when I grew
Mm,
up there. The majority were Cuban, like my parents, like us. And it was just a kind of working class immigrant town. A lot of the women worked in factories, uh, in textile factories, like as my mother
hmm.
did. And most of the businesses were owned by Cubans. Most of my classmates were Cuban. We went to church in Spanish. The collective prayers were always for the freedom of political prisoners in Cuba. Cuba was everywhere. All the
Mm.
posters on businesses were landmarks of Cuba, the lighthouse, the Capitol building, etc. So a very, very Cuban place. Our dentist was a Cuban dentist who didn't have his license yet, so he'd work on our cavities in his living room without anesthesia, right? Like, it was just
Oh,
it was
no.
just a typical. It was an immigrant place, and it had always been an immigrant place. So
And
before
probably like the food and the music and
the food, the music, yes,
yeah.
the food, the
There was
music,
huge waves of Cuban migration at this time. I
right?
hadn't spent a lot of time looking at the history of this, and your book lays it out really well alongside your family story. So you
Hmm.
say that about 300,000 Cubans came over between 1967 and 1973. That's huge. And this,
Yeah,
right now, in this context right now, that seems unreal
right,
because there's such animus and discrimination against immigration and against immigrants.
right.
Whereas at this time during the Cold War, the United States was really trying to open the doors and say, hey, actually come in here. This could help us like get numbers for the Cold War. We
Yeah,
want to promote this.
right,
And they gave voting rights really quick, tried to process naturalization really
right.
quick. So it was
Exactly.
this kind of strange, you call it a hybrid, a strange hybrid
Yeah.
world where you grew up. It was Cuba in the United States in some ways. But still, you talk about some distancing that happens between parents and children
Hmm.
in immigrant families. So you grew up bilingual,
Right,
which meant that you were often a translator as a kid. You were kind
right.
of not just a kid, but also kind of an employee of the family
Yeah,
with, without wages or
yeah.
whatever. But and you also lacked the cultural depth of the Cuban context that your
Right.
parents left behind. So it's sort of growing up in two worlds. What was that like between you and your parents?
Well, for me, it was just normal. It was just life.
Yeah.
That's the way things were. And
Were there tensions about it though?
yes, absolutely. Because, first of all, there was this idea that we were going to go back.
Mm.
And at some point, I stopped wanting to go back, right? Like, I don't
Hmm.
want to go back there. Like, what am I going to do back there?
Yeah, you don't know there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. But, so there was that. And then there was this kind of, they seemed so old fashioned. They had really old-fashioned ideas about gender, which, I think I was always a little feminist, and I resented that, and so there were tensions around that, right? The idea that of what girls were supposed to be, what women were supposed to be.
Yeah, wouldn't you and your sister be like, "We're not in Cuba anymore"? If like,
Exactly. So I was just gonna say that. So they would say, "Oh, you can't do this, you can't do that, you can't do this," and I was like, "We're not in Cuba anymore. This isn't Cuba," and it just became this
yeah,
constant refrain in all our arguments. So
yeah,
so yeah, so there was a lot of tension about that. But at the same time, I think I say in the book, like my sister and I didn't consider ourselves American.
yeah. At the same time,
And I don't think most of the people we were growing up with didn't consider themselves American. I think that might be different
mm,
now, but for other people. But I think we just thought we were Cuban. What are you?
hmm,
Cuban. We're Cuban.
yeah.
I'm Cuban. And that was what we always said.
And a lot of Cubans did too, even though as they were a lot of them seeking citizenship in the United
Yeah.
States. It was more of a political safety rather than a deep identity. And it seems to me like there was space in the American consciousness, maybe at least as far as you all were aware,
Yeah.
that was fine.
Yeah.
Rather than, because there's also the racist sentiment of like assimilationist
Right.
insistence of
Right.
like, if you come over here, you have to do it, quote unquote, the right
The
way,
right
which is
way.
often impossible.
Right.
And you have to leave behind whatever else and like wear American flag pants
Exactly.
everywhere. And
Yeah. And it just, it wasn't like that. And as you said, it was a different time. It was the Cold War. And it wasn't that Americans loved Cubans, but it worked to be able to show all these people fleeing communism. It kind of proved the superiority of the American
Right.
system of capitalism, of democracy, et cetera, et cetera. So it looked good. So they gave them all these advantages, which immigrants would never get now. And which Cubans still technically have, because the law that gave them those advantages, called the Cuban Adjustment Act, is still a law. But the current administration isn't really honoring it.
Sure.
Yeah.
It's such a different context now. Boy,
Yeah.
we could talk forever about that. I want to dig more into your family, though. This is what's so powerful about the book, is you're telling these broader kind of political, geopolitical stories, but how they play out for families is also pretty different. There are these little stories that happen within these broader histories that sometimes get lost when we're taking a mile-high view. So let's talk about Poli a little bit more. As he gets older, the letters kind of take on a different hue a little bit.
Yeah.
You say that they become more and more disturbing. What was Poli going through before he ended up getting to the United States?
That was another reason the letters were so excruciating, right? The letters in the beginning are excruciating because he's a little boy missing his mother, not knowing what's going on.
Yeah.
As he gets older, as he becomes a teenager and a young man, I started to see him as someone who was really traumatized, understandably, someone who, I titled the chapter where I talk about those letters, Mother Hunger. I mean, that's what comes across in this letter, in the letters, this deep, deep, deep hunger and need for his mother. And so the letters grow increasingly intense. He talks about loving my mother and missing her, willing to give up his life for her, wanting to beat up his father because his father's an animal. He talks about, he finally uses the word trauma explicitly to talk about what he experienced. And there's one letter in which he even describes what the trauma feels like, where he says, I try to do the right thing, but no matter how hard I try, it all unravels. And so what were some of the things that were unraveling? Well, I know from the letters that he was doing some drinking, and he was smoking and drinking, gambling. He started
School wasn't working out at that point.
so he started drinking about 15. But the main thing, and this was a total surprise for me, I had no idea that this was the case. He never finished 5th grade. So he was left back shortly, the year that we left, which was probably an early sign of that trauma. But then he never finished. He would fail his promotion exams, or he would just be absent all the time, or he wouldn't show up, and he was never able to finish the grade and advance to 6th grade. So he
This
changed.
wasn't terribly unusual either, right? There was a fair number of...
Yeah, well, that's what was so surprising. So, people always talk about education as one of the achievements of the revolution. And there was a literacy campaign that taught
Yeah.
unlettered people to read and write. There was an enormous increase, for example, in college attendance. Any disparities between Black and white Cubans in terms of educational achievement were basically eradicated or close to eradicated. So on the one hand, there were these incredible achievements. Poli went to school at a place called Ciudad Libertad, which was kind of a model school for the revolution. It was created in the facilities that had been the largest military establishment in the country, Camp Columbia. So close to where my parents lived, my father worked there, and it became a school. And the idea was a showcase for the revolution, rifles into pencils, culture instead of war, learning instead of war, that kind of thing. But it turns out, the neighborhood that it was in was a kind of poor, popular neighborhood, and a lot of people were having the experience that Poli did. So I found some interviews with a teacher there who said about 10% of students were left back every year. So it wasn't that most, but it was significant enough.
Yeah, 10%. Yeah.
Yeah, I know that Foley was not the only one. I think his was particularly extreme, but he was not alone.
Mm.
Yeah.
By the time he eventually came over to the U.S., you're a teenager.
Yeah.
And he's older than you. And this is when you first start to realize he's different, perhaps, than the picture of the brother that was painted for you. That little boy in the photo that your mother had, and in the stories that you were told. And you realize you're a lot further ahead when it comes to education. And he's got rough edges. And as a teenager, you've kind of carved out your own space in this country. And all of a sudden, this older brother shows up. So there was a lot of tension, actually.
Yeah.
It wasn't like a happy reunion for you.
No.
When he joined your family in person.
No, and I really expected it to be, my whole childhood, he was like this, the imagined big brother. And, if you grow up watching things like the Brady Bunch, which I did, he was like the big, a big brother in an American sitcom or something like that. And he wasn't like that at all. He was rough edges. He smoked. He drank beer. His voice was really loud and gruff. And he was just different than the brother that I had created in my imagination. And then it was just awkward, like what did we talk about? And all of a sudden he was there sleeping in our living room. We were in a 2-bedroom apartment and we didn't have an extra. My sister and I shared a room. My parents had the other room and he slept in a cot in the living room. And he was there all the time. And he arrived. It was the month I turned 18. The month I graduated from high school. I was getting ready to go to college. So I was kind of I was getting ready to leave the family.
Yeah.
And it was just a difficult moment for that relationship to get started.
He's probably coming in also on his side and seeing this, what he sees as a very privileged person who didn't have to go through what he went through.
Right,
Cuba.
exactly.
Like you're the kind of the chosen one.
I was
that
the
got to
chosen
leave.
one. Yeah. And I think that was always there. There was my guilt. There was his resentment. And I think he just didn't understand, right? He came from a place where, people didn't go to college, or if they went, people in Havana who went to college, a lot of them lived at home. The idea that I was leaving, and that I was leaving just as he showed up, right? I think there's a part of him that didn't understand. Yeah.
It's a really volatile mix. Yeah. And as you go off to school, you go to Vassar and you're studying there, and as your educational career advances, you start to fall more and more in love with Cuba, which set the stage for you to become one of a premier historian of Cuba. You wanted to get a degree in Latin American history at UT Austin, and you would also, while you're learning in school, you would also pepper your family with questions. Like, here's your parents. You can ask them all these questions, but you say their responses to you were often disappointing. And so what was going on when you're like disappointed with their answers? They're like a primary source.
Right. Well, I think that experience really shaped the way I think of and write about history now. But when we think about history with a big H. We think about big events. We think about structures and major transformations, right? So, and what happened was I would read about historical things and I would ask my parents, do you remember that? Or, did you go to everyone, the thing is often history is written kind of in the collective, right? So there was a Cuban revolution and Cubans went out into the street and celebrated. And that's true, right? But it doesn't mean every Cuban did. And when people say Cuba went through a revolution, it's kind of an abstract thing. Cuba, what is Cuba? It's just a collection of people, right? So, and I would ask them things like, did your parents, follow the Constitutional Convention? Did you go to the rallies for Fidel Castro? What was your experience of the agrarian reform? And their answers were always no, So, no, we didn't go. No, we don't remember. No, we didn't go to the rallies. No, we didn't watch on television because we didn't have televisions. No, we didn't have experience of the agrarian reform because we had no property. That kind of thing. So it was always no. And
at the time, that would be pretty disappointing.
Yeah, exactly.
But I think as a historian, you found out that their stories still matter. Actually, will you go to page 189? This is one of my favorite excerpts. This is really cheesy comparison I'm going to make here. So with all apologies.
Go ahead.
But I related to this in a very silly privileged way, which is I remember in seventh grade, the Beatles became huge again
Yeah.
when I was in seventh
Right.
grade. There was a Beatles anthology and all this. And
Right.
I fell in love with the Beatles. And I was like, oh my gosh, my mom was there. So I went to my mom and I was like, tell me about it. Tell me all this. And she's like, no, I didn't really listen to the Beatles.
Right.
And I was like, womp, womp.
Yeah.
So
Right,
that's such a
exactly.
minor thing. So I can't imagine with a thing like a
Yeah.
country and a revolution and all this, how that
Right.
might have felt. So at the bottom of 189 there, where you say, what I was discovering, start there and just read that. This
Let me just
passage here
find
was
it. What
really
I
a
was discovering. Hold on.
third line
Oh,
from
I
the
got
bottom
it.
there.
I got
Yeah,
it.
so this is a
Yeah.
powerful moment about the macro history of Cuba and then these individual histories that you have fallen in love with as well.
Yeah. Okay. And what I was discovering, without yet being able to put it into words, was the gulf between the history of Cuba I was learning and the history of the two Cuban people who were my parents. There were probably many fewer people who showed up for political rallies and such than there were people like my parents. Utterly ordinary people, always on the margins, absent less as a matter of ideology than from an unconscious sense that history did not belong to them. My parents' story, like that of so many others, could not be absorbed into the central one. It was both its disruption and its essential counterpoint. And it was precisely in that misencounter between the history I was reading and the history of my own family that I found the seeds of how I myself would come to write about the past and its people. But in all those unusual phone calls about history and experience, there was something else too. Embarking on a journey that would catapult me to worlds way beyond my parents, I longed to keep them with me.
Hmm.
And that was true. That was a way I kept them with me, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love this. This is where we get into the nitty-gritty of life.
Yeah.
This is where the big histories include so many of these little histories, and it's so much more
Right.
complex and interesting and beautiful and tragic and troubling and
Yeah.
messed up and amazing. And
Right.
this is, to me, the power of learning history.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily those big stories.
Yeah. And that's the way I think about history in general. Yeah. This idea that, history's all these things, but there's all these lives that are kind of nested within it. And each of those lives kind of condenses that history and is buffeted by that history, sometimes in ways people don't realize.
And there's more twists coming in your
Yeah.
book. Again, it's called Keeper of My Kin, Memoir of an Immigrant Daughter. Ada Ferrer is Dayton Stockton Professor of History at Princeton University. She's also taught at New York University and wrote the Pulitzer Prize-winning book, Cuba, An American History. So speaking of twists, Ada, did not see this one coming. None of them, I think, caught me as off guard as much as when I found out your mom wasn't the only one who
Yeah.
left a son behind.
Yeah.
Your father left a son
Yeah.
behind from a different relationship. So you had another a half brother back in Cuba this whole time. This is Juan Jose.
Mhm.
What was it like finding out about that?
I mean, I was really excited. So my father had a relationship with a woman before he met my mother, and the woman became pregnant and had a child. My father never married the woman, never recognized the son. So my father I remember the conversation in 1987. So I was doing my master's degree at the time at UT Austin in Latin American history. And I was visiting them in Miami. They had moved to Miami by then for the summer. And he told me he had a son in Cuba. And what did I think? Should he be in touch with him? And I was like, yes, absolutely. I was like, how could you not be in touch with him? You've got a son in Cuba. He's in Cuba. I was already studying Cuban history. I was planning on, I wanted to go back to Cuba. I wanted to meet him. I'm always hungry for information. I wanted all the information, and I wanted him to be in touch. So,
Do you think there was anything about you that wondered if, like, the Poli situation
Yeah.
was not great? Here's another
Yeah.
brother opportunity.
Yeah.
Was that any part of it?
I mean, I don't remember thinking that at the time. In writing the book, I thought that maybe, it could be that even for my father, seeing what had happened to Poli made him more curious, made him feel guiltier, made him feel more responsible. So I think maybe that was part of his thinking, but I don't know for sure. And then in my case, I think, yeah, maybe I wanted another chance at a brother.
And you went back and visited. You
Yeah.
stayed with him for a time. There's a great letter that he wrote to your father that you quote from. This
Yeah.
is on page 221. I'll have you read this. So you've gone out to visit him. You spent time with Juan Jose. And then he and your father just kind of took on this correspondence
Yeah.
over a number of years that was just such a sweet and loving
Yeah.
parent-child relationship. So
Right.
yeah, let's
Yeah.
hear this from
Yeah.
this
So
part of the letter.
this was in my I went to Cuba for the first time in 1990, and this was from that first trip. And I had just gone to the weekend to spend time with him and with my father's family. Okay. I left for Havana later that day after a huge meal at Gregorio's. As the time of my departure approached, several people stole away to write short letters to my father, letters I would carry to him by hand. That became a ritual at every subsequent trip, too. I have the letter that Juan Jose wrote to my father that day. Ramon Ferrer, having overloaded myself with emotions and now with hardly any time, I write to you these lines. I write you these lines. I feel happy to have had Ada among us. Today we spent time with Gregorio, Jose Manuel, and Aurelia. I felt good with them. So did my family. It is now time for Ada's departure, and I cannot fathom what to say. Just 2 words. I had imagined her affectionate and down to earth, and I have discovered her better than that. It is hard to put into words the days we spent together. Several times my eyes water, but out of happiness. I won't go on, the moments fly. My only wish is for us to see each other again soon.
It's beautiful. He's a beautiful writer, too.
He was such a beautiful writer. He lived in a small rural town in the center of Cuba, and he was a high school Spanish language and literature teacher.
Yeah, so the letters back and forth between he and your father are so beautiful. And I'm not doing a ton of spoilers in this episode, but I will say one here. The tragedy being that Juan Jose passed away before your father, so that relationship was cut short.
Yeah.
And here on the other side, Poli is still going, and he's getting into a lot of trouble at this time. He's winds up in prison. He's charged with attempted murder. There's all kinds of difficulties that are going on that side. And as you mentioned earlier, your resentment or the difficulty in your relationship built up until you finally confronted him at one point or had a kind of a more straightforward conversation with him. You got a little bit more blunt with him. And I wanted to hear you read from that part as well. This is on 284. So Poli had just been causing a lot of problems for your family, and you confronted him about it.
Well, I didn't quite confront him. I wanted to, but I didn't.
Okay.
I was too scared to confront him.
Okay.
So want me to start there?
Yeah, that's an interesting distinction.
Yeah.
Now let's read this. I want to unpack that. Yeah.
Okay. Yet there was also a part of me that always wanted to talk to Poli about all of it, about my mother's decision, about his life in Cuba, about his arrival here. But I never dared. The closest we came was on one of his birthdays, December 6th. I called him. He answered. I wished him a happy birthday and asked him how his day was going. He answered angrily. How could it ever be? And then his rant began. He had never been a part of our family. He was not a Ferrer. Everything was bad, wrong. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears. I finally spoke. I know, I said, but I have my own pains. I suffer too. A defensive, guilty, selfish response, I know. He seemed surprised. It broke the momentum of his rage. I asked him if he was taking antidepressants. He said he refused to take any psychiatric drugs. I'm not sure if that meant he was not taking the drugs prescribed under the treatment program. The whole conversation lasted less than 10 minutes, maybe even less than 5, my heart racing the whole time. I wonder now what kind of conversation we might have had if I hadn't been so scared. If the woman who began life as the little baby sister he had loved so much as a boy had said something like, "You are right. You have suffered through things that never should have happened to you. I know that the mother, who I love as much as anything in this world, the mother who loves me the same way, did that to you. I know I was the chosen one. Please forgive her. Forgive me." But I didn't say any of that. I was too afraid. We just hung up.
That's really interesting that I remembered that as a confrontation, because really what you just said was like, hey, I hurt too.
Yeah. But even that was so much to say.
Right.
That's as close
much
as
of a
I got.
confrontation. Yeah.
Yeah.
And to see what you wish you could have said now, again, the tragedy being you didn't ever get the opportunity to do this. Poli passed away, and this is a conversation that will never be had. What was it like then putting it in a book that everyone can read, like kind of sharing it with the world instead of being able to share it with him?
Yeah, I'm not sure yet,
Wow.
to be honest. I mean, I think there was, and I say this several times, I think I was always going to write this book. In college, I wrote a short story about my mother leaving him behind and taking me. I started writing essays about it several times. I think there was a part of me that was always writing it, or at least since the time he came to the US, right? And, but now that I've written it, it'll be out in the world and everyone will make what they will of it. So, and I don't know what that'll be like. That's one of the things that I'm a little, I mean, I don't know if I want this out there, but yeah, it's one thing that it's just a big question mark for me. What it'll be
Mm.
like to talk about the book in public, how people will respond to it. Um, on the one hand, I feel like the book is a kind of not monument, but a kind of just testament to what he went through, to how unfair it all was to him. So in some sense, I'm trying to honor him, but at the
Mm.
same time, it's an ugly, difficult history. So for everyone, and one thing that I want people, maybe I hadn't thought about this before, so let me see. One thing that I
Mm-hmm.
think I want people to take from it is that there are no monsters and there are no saints in this story. I love my mother. I adore my mother. I think she was the best mother in the world. And yet she did this to Bully, you know. Bully used to threaten to kill us. Bully tried to beat me up once, he's
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
so on some level, yeah, maybe he was something of a monster, but he wasn't. He was just this little boy who'd been hurt in really unimaginable ways and
Mm-hmm.
who wanted love and acceptance more than anything else. So I just, life is complicated. History is complicated. People are complicated. And here's the story of one family. And, I say it's a family broken by history, and it is, but it's also a family made by history. You can't understand our family unless you put us in history. And I think you can't really understand history unless you make room for families like ours and people like us, just ordinary people they're not the ones making history, but they're the ones living it, right? They're the ones who deal with it day to day, who suffer its consequences, who kind of feel its effects in their bones and in their souls.
Mm-hmm. What do you think makes you so reluctant to talk about that? Like
Well,
where?
not reluctant. I just don't know what it's gonna feel like in a way. I mean,
Hmm.
this is the first time I'm doing it. So,
Hmm.
um, it's strange because this is my fourth book. All of them have to do with the history of Cuba in some sense.
Yeah.
When you write a history book, when you talk about a history book, you write and speak with authority, right?
Mm.
And it took a lot for someone like me to feel that authority, right?
Yeah. That's hard
To
earned.
live
Yeah.
it, to inhabit it, to accept it. And so here I'm writing in part as this little girl. I mean, I'm also
Hmm.
writing as who I am and who I became, but it's just like the book makes me go back to these painful stories in which I was still a different person and I
Mm-hmm.
didn't have any authority. I had a lot of fear and a lot of sense of not belonging. And so how do I speak about that in public? You know? I don't know. I haven't quite figured it out.
I get that. I also wonder too if it's just part of your training because you're trained up as a historian in a way that you don't necessarily historians don't often put themselves in the story, and
Right.
so it also seems like that's just not the type of work that you do. In fact, sometimes that could
Right.
even be frowned on. It's like
Right.
don't make yourself part of the story. You say in the acknowledgments, you thank your editor, Colin Harrison,
Yeah.
for telling you,
Right.
"Hey, we need more of you in here. Put more of you in
Yeah,
here."
I would cringe when he said that, but he was right.
Yeah,
And he was right.
he
So,
was.
yes, but I think it's important for people to put themselves in the story. I mean, this is history. I mean, it's
Hmm.
such a personal story. It's a memoir. It's intimate. It's raw. It's
Yeah.
painful.
See, your family's lucky. This is what I was thinking, Ada, is like if everybody had an Ada to do this kind of work. This is reparative and healing, but not unflinching and not comfortable. What a gift to your family. And you even mentioned sometimes your mother maybe had an inclination
Yeah.
that this could be possible by sort of preserving these records and kind of leaving
Yeah.
breadcrumbs for you along the way. So maybe she didn't lay everything out about not telling Polly that she was leaving and all the things she left out of the stories, but
She
she
left
left
the
the
records.
records
Can I
there
show
for
you
you.
something? Well, you're not going to be able to show this. This is,
Yeah.
I refer to this in the book. This is this little jar I found. And she labeled
Yes.
everything in it. And
Yes.
it has this red rose, paper tissue rose that
That's the rose Polly made.
that Bolly sent to my mother with my aunt. And she put a little, I'm not going to be able to get it. There's a
Yeah.
little tiny,
I was going to ask you if you
yeah.
had it
So
near,
here's,
actually.
I wish I had
That's so
tweezers
cool.
here, but here is, here's her little note where she kind of labeled everything. She was
Yeah.
just like this natural archivist,
Mm.
natural historian.
Yeah.
In that tape, the tape she made that had all the um the chants of the street vendors and things like that. So
Yeah, the
yeah,
cassette tape.
yeah,
So cool. I
yeah,
love this.
yeah,
So, and I imagine, again, you're trained as a historian. So I think you probably were exercising a lot of muscles in this book that you weren't necessarily trained to do. So I think
yeah,
maybe
yeah,
some of the difficulty comes from that as well.
yeah. But it was also
Yeah.
good. I mean, the thing is, part of what allowed me to do it, because it was so hard, writing so personally and so kind of openly, but part of what allowed me to do it was that I had the sources my mother left me,
Hmm.
that I could be the historian digging through the letters and going to the archives and looking for my brother in the camp and things like that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. In the camp that he first arrived at, the sort of refugee type
yeah,
situation. Keeper of My Kin is the name of the book. I recommend it so much. Let's go to page 322 to conclude here. There's so many stories in the book that we didn't have time to talk about, but I did want to end with the last months of your father's life. He died at age 101,
hmm
so he outlived your mom.
hmm
That age just seems unreal and
yeah,
miraculous to
yeah,
me.
yeah,
But of course, at the same time, it also meant that he suffered from dementia
hmm
as time went on. And he had become a prolific writer in his later years.
hmm
He would write all this stuff.
yeah,
He would write letters to Fidel Castro, and you found all these records and stuff. And you tried to tap into his memories as he was losing his memories through his writing. So read this excerpt here about when you would visit your
yeah.
father.
Every time I visited, I tried giving him the notebook to see if he would write again. My sister sometimes did the same thing. I'll write it down, she begged. You can just dictate. One day, he recited a poem of his own invention, and she transcribed it just as he said it, in Spanish. I reproduced part of it here in my own translation, but I didn't have to translate the word beautiful, because that one, for some reason, my father said in English. I have before me a pretty vase of flowers with white, red, green, and yellow petals. They are beautiful. They asked me to write more, but frankly, what I want to do is tell my daughter to go to hell. He and Aixa would have laughed together. The rest of the notebook is completely empty. Whenever I visited, I spent time sitting in a recliner next to his rented hospital bed. I'd extend my hand and take his, and we'd just be quiet together. One day I asked him about his letters to Fidel Castro. How did you get Fidel's address? I asked. He told me he had just figured it out. I asked if Fidel ever replied. He said he couldn't remember ever having received a response. I asked him what he said to Fidel in the letters. He paused, then said sheepishly, Cualquiera se equivoca. Anyone can make a mistake. But I don't know if he meant that the mistake had been his in writing to Castro at all, or in Fidel's in making the revolution as he had. Another day, sitting in the same manner, our hands linked together on the edge of the bed, I thanked him for bringing me to the United States. I have never quite felt one with this country, but I know with absolute certainty that I have made a life here that would have been inaccessible to me in Cuba. That day, I pondered aloud with my father what might have happened if he hadn't brought me to the United States when he did. Maybe I would have left later as an adult. Maybe I'd be trying to leave now, I said, across the U.S.-Mexico border, as many Cubans were then doing. Maybe, I added, I wouldn't have made it. Who knows what might have happened? So I thanked him again, and he looked pleased. It was more intense than pleasure. He looked into my eyes like I was the proof of something.
That's Ada Ferrer reading from the book Keeper of My Kin, Memoir of an Immigrant Daughter. All right, Ada, let's close with the segment Regrets, Challenges, and Surprises. This is a moment when you can reflect, and you kind of already have.
Yeah.
So let's hear what you have to say about anything you would change about the book as it's coming out soon.
I mean, basically, I just finished doing the audiobook, and as I was doing the audiobook, um, there were a few things, but tiny things. Like I would have changed some of the chapter titles. Some of the phrases that were really hard to say orally, I wish I had thought about and, and written them differently. But I think it's too soon to tell. I think I need more
Yeah.
responses and conversations with people. So not sure yet about regrets. Surprises, there were so many surprises as I wrote it. I mean,
Yeah.
one surprise I've mentioned is just finding all the things that my parents left that served as the
Yeah.
sources for me, that I feel like they were the gifts to me and they allowed me to write the book the way I
Yeah.
did. And
It feels like a book of surprises.
Yeah.
Like there's surprise after surprise, and we get to experience those with you as
Yeah.
you tell the history.
Yeah, so I think that was a big surprise. On the one hand, I wasn't surprised by how hard it was to write in terms of dealing, like reading Foley's letters and dealing with the pain, the story, and the kind of the heartbreak of it. One surprise, though, was how much I loved working on it. I just loved working on it. I loved, and I say in the acknowledgments that part of that is that, I would come to my study, I would sit in my study every morning and I would get to spend time with my parents and just thinking about them and reading their words and kind of living in my relationship with them. So how much I loved doing that and how soul affirming it was a surprise.
Your sister has read it yet?
My sister has read it. Yeah, she read it. She read a draft and gave me some feedback, and it was very, very helpful feedback. And she's been great throughout this whole process, because in some ways
Yeah.
it's the story of my life, but it's the story of our family's life. So people are going to find out a lot about her through this book.
Yeah.
And, and I would call her out of the blue and say, remember this, what about this? What do you, and that wasn't always welcome because you'd be going about your life and all of a sudden I was
Yeah.
calling out of the blue to ask her about things she didn't want to remember in that moment. So
Yeah.
it was hard emotional labor for her as well. So so she's been great.
If this is too personal of a question, I can retract it. But did you talk to any therapist or there's a lot of there's trauma in here for you too.
Yeah.
So did you have to process that in any way?
Oh, I've been in therapy forever.
You're like, I'm already there.
I've been in
Awesome.
therapy forever. Don't put that in. Don't put that in.
Okay.
I don't know.
Okay.
You do what you want. No, maybe not. Maybe that's my.
No, I don't have to put it in. I think it's cool because I think people need to hear that therapy's a thing, and that I don't know. There's too much of a stigma around it.
Yeah.
And
Okay,
I don't
then
think enough
say it.
people.
Yeah.
But only if you want me to, though. I'm only if you're uncomfortable, that's not a problem.
Okay, I've been in therapy forever. I wish more people in my life were in therapy.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah.
Agreed. And a lot of this podcast is sort of directed in that
Yeah.
way. So same.
Yeah.
In fact, I need to get back in. It's been a little while,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
I'm ready to get back. All right, that's Ada Ferrer, author of the book Keeper of My Kin, Memoir of an Immigrant Daughter. She also wrote Cuba and American History, which won a Pulitzer Prize. She's the Dayton Stockton Professor of History at Princeton University. And Ada, again, there's so much in the book. I say this a lot, but this book is just packed.
Yeah.
It's packed with wonderful, tragic, beautiful things. Thank you so much for all the work you did to put it together, and also thanks for taking time to talk to me about it.
Well, thank you for having me. I really enjoyed it. It's a great first conversation about the book. I'm so excited I got to have it with you here.
That's it for this episode of Relationscapes. If this is your first time with us, welcome to the journey. I hope you'll check out some of the other episodes while you're here. And if you're enjoying the podcast, I would really appreciate it if you'd rate and review it in Apple Podcasts. You can also rate it in Spotify. And another way you can help me grow the audience is by recommending the show to a friend. If somebody in your life came to mind while you were listening to this one, send them a link. If you want to see some video clips from this episode and some other bonus stuff, follow me on Instagram and TikTok. Mates of State provides our theme music. I'm your host, Blair Hodges, an independent journalist in Salt Lake City, and I hope to spend more time with you soon here on Relationscapes.